the Countryside Podcasts with Chris Skinner. Birds going into roost. It's getting dark, and it's one of our evening visits to High Ash Farm at Caister St Edmund in the county of Norfolk. And welcome to the Countryside Podcast with Chris Skinner. And Chris is, as usual, he's pioneering a route, and I'm following in his wake. Hello, Chris.
Matthew, I think it's the first time I've said good evening to you.
You normally just say, oi.
Oi, you. Get some work done. Exactly. Well, this is where I've been working for about nearly 4 weeks now, Matthew, and it's a sad sight of fallen ash trees which I've cut up because they've gone across the tracks. We did cover it a few weeks ago after some of the storms we'd had here, because I was rather mystified. This is an area of field that we're standing in, which you believe, in 1942 RAF pilot flew over the top of where we're standing, took some photographs, and I was quite surprised it was a field of barley. And at the end of the 1930s, there was quite an agricultural depression, and a lot of land just got abandoned and farmers stopped growing crops on it. And yet it's a very fertile area, low down here. We're in Fox's Grove, and all the trees, there's a very, very large ash tree that's still there right at the end of this area, about 200 yards away. It's an enormous tree, and it self-seeded that year and blew all the little samaras, they're called, ash seeds, which have little wings on them, and they floated over all of this, and literally hundreds of them set seed and have become quite mature ash trees. You can see one over there, look, beautifully, telegraph pole straight going all the way up. And a lot of them are still quite healthy because, you know, it's High Ash Farm, so I have a huge interest in Fraxinus excelsior, the scientific name, the common ash. And I'm mystified because some of the trees that have fallen over have no sign whatsoever of ash dieback. And I keep scratching my head as to what's caused it. I've examined the ones that have fallen over very carefully and found there's virtually no roots on them. And I'm standing right beside one here, and it's perfectly good looking healthy tree with a good canopy at the top, nothing dead at the top. And because I was having a coffee break, been chainsawing, so just having 15 minutes off, and I walked up to this tree and had a look, and I was quite shocked. And so if I go down on my hands and knees, I'll explain why. Look, it's completely rotten. There, look.
We're looking right at the base of the tree.
Yep, and the roots have all gone. Rotten. The bark's actually come off that one. Look here. Absolutely rotten. You can peel the bark off. Look, there you are. Peeling it off with my fingernail. You shouldn't be able to do that.
A healthy tree would be, as you'd expect, impossible to do.
Yes. Now, if we got some winds forecast again coming, and I dread what's going to happen because there's nothing at all to support this tree. The roots have gone all the way around the tree. It's just standing there like an enormous post in the ground. No roots.
So this isn't the symptom of a very wet ground and soil?
Not at all. Ash actually is a shallow-rooted tree, and you'll find it growing more up in the central belt around the Pennines, in the Peak District in particular, around Dovedale. There's when you go up through the sort of calcium outcrops up there, the chalk outcrops, that's ash's favourite habitat, and that's the high pH is what it likes. That's what it's got here. We've got lime underneath us, so nothing to do with that. I don't think it's anything to do with drought. But look, I can actually put my finger into a root, dig a hole. Look.
It's like Caerphilly cheese.
It's absolutely rotten.
Crumble.
Now, because I'm not a scientist and I'm not an expert, but I've learnt to look and try and understand the things that I see out in the countryside. And I'm wondering if ash dieback, which is a fungus which comes through the air, and then usually it can infect the upper canopy. I'm wondering if it's also able to infect the roots first of the tree, because obviously the spores will hit the tree. If you get wet weather, they'll get washed down onto the ground, and that might be the reason that some of these lovely ash trees have just keeled over with nothing to support them.
And these fairly mature ash trees, we sort of thought before you spotted this, we sort of thought that they would last a little bit longer, didn't
Yes, with ash dieback, and that's exactly, the name says a lot about it. It affects some of the new growth, so we planted some new areas of woodland here under stewardship, and I used a British native mix of trees: oak, ash, hornbeam, some beech as well as an understory. And virtually all those young ash trees just died about 2 years after we planted them in 2006. So it was about 2010 it really got going. Discovered quite close to where we are at Ashwellthorpe, funny enough, in Norfolk.
I remember walking through that plantation, the recently planted ashes, and you just snapping them all off, and they were like twigs,
exactly.
Dry
So
brushwood.
it does obviously infect younger trees, but with the mature trees, as I said, I've examined this one high up, and I cannot find anything wrong with the crown. But this is even more shocking. This, look, I can just take a whole handful of root out. Here it is. And look here. Look, the bark is peeled off, and we're about a metre up the tree now. There it is. Absolutely dead. So I've got a dead tree standing here. It's beautiful, and it's still getting some sap up to the canopy, obviously.
But it's doomed.
It is doomed, and it's likely your next visit, if we get some more high winds that are forecast, this one will be laying across the woodland track. Yet more work for me to clear up. I don't mind that, but I'm just so sad because ash trees are British natives, rather like the elm, which has nearly disappeared from the countryside right across our country. So there we are, a little bit of a worry. So a bit of a grim note to start this week's podcast, but we're just going to walk across the little track here, and I'm just going to show you something to cheer you up.
Look forward to that. But anyone with any info on ash trees and whether this is a phenomenon that anyone else has noticed, please do get in touch.
Yes.
We'll have the email address later.
Yes. Yeah. I'd be intrigued to know.
Rat the terrier is with us. He's ratting about, and I think he wanted to get back in the car. But
he's got something even more exciting now.
Oh yes, he's just disappeared down a hole there.
We're in the centre of Fox's Grove here at Caister St Edmund, and this area of the woodland is my pride and joy. We usually come here perhaps once, maybe twice a year, and you can see there's a big fallen branch here. It's off this venerable old pollarded oak tree, several hundred years old, and the branch has been on the ground for best part of 20 years, and it's sort of dried like ivory, and you can see there's no leaves on the ground the other side of it, and it's still about 18 inches, 2 feet off the ground in places. It's a big arch-shaped branch, nearly a foot thick at one place, so it's a good old piece of oak. And this is the badger's play area, because we're standing right on the edge of the badger set at High Ash Farm, my pride and joy.
And these are all the holes that rats explore.
Yes, so I've got to negotiate you past some of them, because you could fit in some, I can promise you. They're huge. But I have the camera here against this old oak tree and pointed it over here towards where the badgers play, and for this podcast, for this weekend, Sunday the 26th, I'll make sure that we have 4 of last year's badger cubs playing in front of the camera, and you can only call them one thing, and that's delinquent teenagers.
So it's a bit of rough and tumble.
More than that, they try and bite each other, and they do. The tumbling is part of it. They go upside down, and they're just play fighting in a most amusing way, and because they've got so much history. It sort of says they're the original landowners, and they were certainly here in this country sort of before the last ice age. I knew he'd bark, and he actually looks like a badger because he's got a white stripe down the middle of his head. But he's had one or two near misses with one of the sows in the set, and I think he's learnt not to go down there. But I've brought you here for a reason, so we're just going to walk over the top of the set a little bit.
Looks a little like a moonscape here.
It absolutely does. Just be careful because there's fallen branches, lots of leaves on the ground. There's a badger hole that's collapsed there. Look, it's just dropped straight down. Come on, Matt. Good boy. And we're going across. This particular set's got about 50 entrances. And to date I've recorded 15 different badgers here, which 4 of them are cubs. Last year the old matriarch sadly passed away. She died, and there's several other sow badgers, and I think there's 2 bulls at least, mature bulls. And why I've brought you here, I'm not the bull, don't worry. Look, can you see this has been freshly excavated? It's an existing badger hole.
Yes, you can see disturbed soil there.
Yes, disturbed soil and leaves as well. Lots of leaves which are being taken down into the hole down there.
And by the way, we're doing all this by the light of a torch because it is now quite dark.
It is almost completely dark. So they're the mounds that the badgers have dug out. There's probably over 1,000 metres of tunnels underneath us, and 50, 60, 70 tonnes of soil dug out all around us. So it does look like a moonscape. But just here, last night, I did have the camera here, and I have started to film for a future podcast the sow actually bringing the soil out. And it's all fresh soil here and again there. And what that means is, actually, if we go a bit closer and have a look.
Being careful not to fall down the edge, because this really is a steep
look,
hole.
You can actually fit in there, Matthew.
This is enormous. It is like a cavern.
Yes.
With all this very light-coloured soil you've got here.
Yes, it's sandy soil, so it's easy for them to dig out. So she goes down and she's enlarging an area to give birth in, and then she's taking leaf litter, anything she can find, down into the set. And they're her footprints there. There's a good one there. It's light, sandy soil on this hillside escarpment, so easy digging, and dry soil as well. Great big paw marks there. Another one there, look, it's almost clenched fist size. So the front feet are much larger. They've got 5 very sharp toes on, so the badger can actually, with short legs, very, very powerful front end and neck. She goes down, she scrapes away and sort of tweezles out any stones as well, gets them under her belly, and then her back legs, also with 5 toes on, but very short claws on the back feet. She gets that and brings her back legs forwards and then pushes the soil behind her. And then she reverses out of these holes, rather like a bulldozer, using her bottom and her hind legs, and then she throws the soil all around here. And I have stood watching the badgers once, and quite shocked I got sprayed with soil.
It's like a muck spreader operation, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And it goes quite a few yards out.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it does. Yeah. So this is the beginning of a new mound. And so what she's now doing is she will have perhaps mated last March, perhaps. March, even into April. She comes back into season after she's given birth quite soon, and then something magical happens. The eggs are fertilised, but they don't implant into her uterus. It's called delayed implantation. And she will give birth around about January, before the end of this month anyway. So it's very, very close indeed. And I won't be able to see the cubs. They'll be in a little straw nest, or she'll come and gather some bracken. She'll also go to the meadow at the end of the wood here where there's some horses hay, and that's top-notch bedding, and she'll bring that back in her mouth. It looks like kind of having a huge moustache, and sometimes with the leaf litter she'll just put one paw round it, one front leg, and walk in backwards with a great basket of leaf litter to keep the cubs warm. But there you are, that's an example of real excavation, which is when you come over here a little bit more, you can actually see the depth that goes down. Yes. There, if you bend right down, it goes off at a huge angle. It's a double hole.
I have to say, it's so tantalising that we've got a population of badgers under here.
Right under
and they can hear us.
Oh, yes, they're fully aware that we're here. And Rat's now venturing right down. He's very cautious, look. He's Rat, I think it's not a good idea to venture out of sight. Can you come here, Rat? Good boy. Good.
Well, a badger would outweigh him.
Oh,
there.
Absolutely. Of course, they'd been persecuted hugely over the centuries, things called badger baiting. Where you'd sort of set terriers down in a set, or even cage a badger, break its bottom jaw so that it couldn't bite dogs back. I mean, the horrors that we used to sort of dish out to our native wildlife was horrendous. That's all stopped. It is possible to change our attitude towards our animals. Sadly, we have TB now. If a cow is a reactor, or a bullock, a heifer, or even a bull to tuberculosis, it's inoculated. If it's clear, it isn't put down. But with badgers, they're usually shot first and then examined to see if they have tuberculosis, but it's all too late. So it seems a little bit unfair, but it's a hugely divisive issue, badger culling. But right back in 1992, there was the Badger Protection Act, which further strengthened the laws against killing badgers, and of course it's been superseded by cull zones in certain parts of the UK where there's a high cattle population, also where there's a higher rainfall and more pasture, and that's why it's unusual over in the eastern side of the UK, which we are here in Norfolk, to have badgers, because it's much drier, there's not so much grazing land, and badgers need the grass because that's where the high worm population is, and surprisingly that's almost the main part of their diet is worms for breakfast, which is shortly. Remember, they're almost strictly nocturnal, and the way most people see badgers today is, and that's the highest death toll for them in the United Kingdom, is road casualties, and we're building more roads, faster roads, and so I do feel so sorry and sympathetic for poor old Brock.
Well, the odds are stacked against them, and no wonder they keep themselves to themselves.
Yes.
But the evidence is there on the roads, and we have seen their eyes lighting up as well, haven't we?
Oh, on our nocturnal safaris
previously,
when we do. Yes, we do. They're definitely here. But just look, if I hold the torch low and go across the top of the ground there, just look at what an amazing set of sort of soil. Look at that one. There must be 20 tons outside that set alone. So there we are, a little bit of the history of the badger, why they're welcome here, and bear in mind we're mammals just like them. The parental care that a sow badger, that's the female, gives to the young is absolutely amazing. They don't open their eyes. Oh, what was that? Something called out in the distance, whether that was a roe deer or that was so far away. Suddenly heard, and the nighttime noises have started, Matthew.
Might be some of the people driving down here on the road, possibly, but
yeah.
Well, here we are. I mean, it's early evening. It is dark because it's January.
Yes.
But early in the morning, I think tomorrow morning, you're going to go to get one of the sounds of this time of year.
Yes, because very many people kind of get a bit despondent that it looks grey, it's brown, the mornings are cold, but already, Matthew, the dawn chorus has started. So I'm going to keep the microphone, and I'm going to go out just before first light, and I'm going to try my very best to give you some real tasty dawn chorus. Good morning, everybody. It's just before 7 o'clock in the morning. It's still almost pitch black, but dawn is just around the corner, and I'm standing under one of the poplar trees on the edge of my garden, which is completely covered in ivy. And each morning over the last 3 or 4 weeks, a robin has been singing. You can probably hear it way above my head. It's doing the early dawn chorus. One of the cock bantams outside the building beside me, where the farm workshop is, been sleeping in a tree overnight, is also crowing, doing his rather rustic version of the dawn chorus. It's quite surprising that robins sing this early. In fact, it's only about 2 months of the year when they don't sing. And July and August is the usual months when they molt, and they tend to go quiet then. That's after they've taken off a second brood, if they're lucky. Many young robins get killed by cats, owls, flying into plate glass windows when they're not experienced. So there's quite a high death toll in the robin population. It surprises everybody because they've got some quite closely related cousins. Nightingale is one, and that always surprises everybody, and also blackbird and thrush. In fact, robins are members of the thrush family. The missel thrush, the largest species in the UK, native. Then we have 2 introduced species, but come just for the winter. They introduce themselves, I should say, and that's the redwing and the fieldfare, also close cousins. And then the third one would be the ring ouzel, or the mountain blackbird, as it's also called, and they're all members of that family, and all of them, they all sing. They're parts of our songbird population. So what's the robin doing singing at this time of the morning? It's rather cold. It's a little bit damp this morning. And what's happened is it's set up a territory by singing in it. The sexes look alike, male and female robins almost look identical, and that kind of causes a problem when the male is setting up a territory. If another male's about, then he'll try and oust it by a little bit of singing together, or a little bit of jostling goes on sometimes. And if a female robin comes along, he'll try and oust her as well. But if she persists, then the pair bond is made after a few weeks. And at this time of the year, towards the end of January, he'll start courtship feeding her, and that strengthens the pair bond, and it's also crucial for building up the subcutaneous fat just under her skin, which she'll need to provide energy when she's incubating the eggs. The eggs can be in a little cup-shaped nest, which is why I'm standing under this tree covered in ivy. It's an ideal place for them to nest, plenty of shelter. Remember, you can still get some pretty inclement weather in February and into early March when she's either incubating or the young have actually hatched. 4 or 5 eggs usually laid, kind of a pale whitish background to the eggs, and they're covered in kind of amber speckles, I suppose, and quite small, tiny little eggs, not much larger than your little fingernail, to give you an idea. And she'll incubate those, and she's completely really dependent on the male for carrying on that feeding. No longer courtship feeding, it's a sort of life-sustaining feeding. And I first started recording robins and blackbirds because they're the easiest birds to record, often around the farmyard, nice and easy. Blackbirds would often choose the same perch to sing on. So I adopted a trick by finding a little hollow branch and popping my really sensitive microphone inside the branch, and one morning recording the blackbird actually singing down the microphone. It crouched down. onto the little stick, and its sternum was touching it, and I heard this strange noise. It sounded rather like a pneumatic drill in the distance going, but it wasn't. It was the blackbird's heart. And subsequently I had the sound slowed down and discovered that it was about 600 beats a minute. That's 10 beats a second, and the robin can easily top trump that by going normal heart rate is around about 1,000 heartbeats per minute. That's around 16 heartbeats a second. So you can see why we fall in love with them. They kind of live life in the fast lane, always active. The eyes are quite large and bright, and of course that red breast is one of the first birds that most people learn and identify. And of course it's a feature on many Christmas cards as well. The robin's breast was meant to have been pierced by a thorn off Christ's crown, and it got stained blood red ever since. But that's just one of the many stories that robins have. It was also had a different name until a couple of centuries ago. It was originally robin redbreast, but before that, Old English word of ruddock. And that's still used in some parts of the country, the original name, rather than robin. So there we are. And of course, it's a name that makes you smile when you see it. We've got some figures in culture. Robin Goodfellow, the friendly sprite. Of course, our favourite outlaw of all, who stole from the rich and gave to the poor. Robin Hood, of course. And it's still a popular name. Then Christopher Robin as well, features in a lot of children's literature too. So a friendly bird and a friendly name, often accompanying gardeners when you dig the garden looking for their main diet food, which is worms and soil invertebrates as well. So they kind of form a relationship quite close to humans, and that's helped them in the past, particularly in cold weather when people put out scraps for them, and that just helps sustain them, because you can have high mortality in prolonged cold weather. But on the continent, there are still exactly the same species of robin, but they're far more wary, for good reason, because they're still eaten, and so they've learnt to become more wary. So if you're out walking, you won't get particularly close to them as you do here in the countryside, here in the east of England. But beautiful birds to have in the garden, always busy, always sort of makes you smile and feel good about nature when you see a robin. First mallard just coming in for breakfast, just flying over the top of me. So it's all set to go on the farm today, but my heart's in my mouth this morning because we've got some high winds forecast, and with all the trees here at High Ash Farm, some of which have ash dieback, I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that we miss the worst of it. But still, just listen to this robin. It's such a lovely, uplifting sound. I'll go quiet now. Let the robin have the last word, so to speak.
Well, after that early morning High Ash Farm visit with Chris and the robin, we're back in the early evening now. It is dark. Chris playing some lights of the van over the fields here. We're rather hoping to see an owl, weren't we?
Yes, we're well endowed with barn owls, little owls and tawny owls, Matthew. All of them find an easy home, easy living here with the crops that I grow. We've got lots of small mammals, and it kind of works up the chain from those small mammals which got seeds to feed on. So the seeds feed the small mammals, then you have the predators to eat the small mammals, and it's that lovely chain of life which intrigues me. So let's just turn this noisy truck off. Handbrake on.
Maybe the owl will come to us.
Yes, it's quite possible. Anything can happen at High Ash.
We've got some of your emails, so we've got the light on here in the truck. And Carolyn Skipper, hello to you. And she says, "Hi, Chris. Thanks for another great podcast. Love hearing the ducks having their afternoon tea. Do you have any idea what these 4-inch deep holes could be?" And there's a photograph. "They're covering the patch of lawn by our drive. Not seen this happen in the past. We live in Catfield. It's in the Broads, in Norfolk Broads, very nearby." And here's the photograph.
Yes, I've had a good look at them, and they sort of look like long-tailed field mice have been digging. They're quite... We were just talking about small mammals. Coincidentally, I think that's what you've got there. And if you invested in one of these new trail cams, they're not too expensive. You'd be amazed the wildlife, even in your own garden, even in urban and suburban areas around towns, cities and villages all across the eastern counties, and particularly, if you're lucky like me and have a farm, the amount of wildlife that you can actually see is totally amazing. Without the camera, it's absolutely really risky to be completely positive, but it doesn't look as though it's made by a bird, and strangely there's no little mounds of soil around the holes, which might suggest some underground excavations going on, and it's not a mole hole because there's obviously no large amounts of soil around the hole. So that's my best bet, that you've got long-tailed field mice which are just digging in to perhaps find some roots to eat. Their diet is quite wide, so thank you.
Here's one from Brendan, who's in County Fermanagh, and he's a supporter of the podcast, so thank you for that. He says, "My query relates to deer." And we've seen lots of them this evening, just in the last few minutes.
Yeah, just heading away from the badger set to where we are now, and we've seen Chinese water deer, we've seen muntjac, and I think I got a flash of a roe deer as we left where the badgers were.
Brendan says, "Over the last few weeks at night time, I've heard what appears to be stags fighting. Lots of grunting. What sounds like fighting with sticks, which I presume is antlers, clashing. It only seems to happen on darker nights without much moonlight. It sounds quite intense, seems to continue all night, as it can be heard early in the morning as well. I've been unable to catch sight of the animals in question, as there's a lot of hedgerows and cover. I can only assume it's red deer, as they're very common here, although there would be a few seeker deer around as well. I'm familiar with the rut around October, when the red deer stags are very vocal, but I didn't think they'd continue to fight through until January."
Right, that's a really interesting observation, because you're quite right. The rut for seeker deer and for the red deer finishes sort of towards the end of October and maybe into November. But there are lots of young stags as well, which haven't been able to be kind of manly enough yet, if you like, to get a harem of the hinds, the female deer, together, and they will continue fighting. And I've seen this at High Ash Farm about 2 years ago in one of the horse paddocks. One morning I drove past and just busy counting the horses, and instead of 5 horses, there were 12, and they weren't horses. The remaining 7 or 8 of them were red deer, and they were all stags. And you've heard of a stag do, have you? Yes?
Well, I have, yes. I think I might have been on one or two.
Oh, right. There we are. So the males will all get together and they will carry on this kind of jousting business, and it is such an eerie sound. If you didn't know what it sounds as though you've got Morris dancers in the village clacking their sticks together and their heels, and there's no bell sounds obviously, but it is the antlers, and it can be of either species. Seeker deer will do it, the young stags, and so will the red deer in particular, and it's a kind of hollow, almost like stones clicking together, and I've heard it several times, and they're just jousting and having sort of play fighting almost, but learning the skills that you need to take over the harem in future years when the present dominant stag has had his day.
Ron in Old Buckenham, which is not many miles from the farm here near Norwich. Ron knows that this podcast will be published on the 26th of January, and he says it happens to be the birthday of my friend Deborah, who also lives in Old Buckenham. We're both followers of Chris Skinner podcast and have previously had our questions answered. Deborah is currently studying for a horticultural qualification, is having to learn and to spell all the proper names of plants. Could you possibly give Deborah some hints on how to remember them all and send birthday greetings at the same time?
Well, of course. So happy birthday, Deborah. Thank you for listening to the podcast. And as for the wildflowers, it's taken me over half a lifetime to learn all about them. So don't try and do it all at once. Just get to know when each particular wild plant comes into flower. Learn about it, learn a little bit. Just do one at a time, and then you'll kind of build a library up in your head. It happens slowly, and the more you get in your head, the more varieties, the more interesting it becomes, and then you kind of fall in love with it all and realise just how special the earth is. We share all these other living organisms with, and yeah, you'll become amazed, and you can become quite expert as well, so you can read up about them. There's always lots of information to be found in really good wildlife books, wildflower books, anything like that, and just absorb a little bit about each of the species each time. So don't try and learn too much in one go as a secret.
And often the colloquial names do make sense, don't they?
Oh yes, like daisy is a good way. I mean, it's such a simple one. Bellis perennis is be the scientific name. Daisy is the sun, of course, and when you see a daisy, you think of the sun. Speedwell, we looked at a couple of weeks ago, is an old Irish saying, speed you well, and it helps you to remember, some of the history of the wild plants. Meadow sweet's another lovely one.
And the fox gloves that look like a fox's glove.
Yes, Digitalis purpurea. Yes, and the meadow sweet was used years ago to sweeten sort of an air freshener in medieval kitchens. It used to be a bit pongy, and they'd spread it on the floor. So, but it goes back even earlier to the early monks who used it to sweeten mead, and it's actually mead sweetener, meadow sweet. There we are.
Hope you have a lovely birthday, Deborah.
Yes.
And don't do any studying on your birthday. Just have a nice time.
No, or you'll end up like me, and my nickname at college was Weed.
Weed? Any more questions and comments? We've got a regular podcast going, and you can send your emails to chris@highashfarm.com. Also, any support with the running costs of this podcast will be very welcome. A one-off small monthly donation, either one of those would be very welcome indeed. And just go to the link on highashfarm.com/podcast. And we're going to head off into the dark now.
We are. We're already in the dark, Matthew. We may be lucky and see something exciting on the way back, but it's time to turn the microphone off, and you've got to wait till the following Sunday for the next podcast. So do hope you can join us then.
I've got sausages for my tea tonight, so
I haven't got anything planned at all, but I've got to do some cooking quite shortly. And of course, Rat is here on my lap, and he has tea first. Look, he's already he's licking his lips. Look, and
He knows.
Oh dear.
Bon appetit.
Tea time, meat and biscuits, and I got a kiss. Yuck.